without further ado, enough of my rambling, let us take you on to our first speaker, and I'm going to welcome the amazing Gemma Russell to talk about microconversions.
Hi, so as said, my name is Gemma. I'm Head of Paid Media at Fountain, and today I'm going to talk about microconversions and how to make them count for PPC. So just picture the scene. Someone visits a website. I know that doesn't happen very often, not really part of our jobs or anything, but just think about that. Someone visits a website and then they buy something straight away. How often do you think that happens? Well, let's be honest with you, probably less than 5% of the time. I did make that up, by the way. I don't know how many people really do that, but let's just say less than 5% of the time. What I'm going to talk about today is to try and kind of cover exactly how we understand how somebody goes from never having heard of your brand all the way through to buying. So we're going to talk about what microconversions actually are, because you might call them something completely different, and why you should care about them, so why they're important. Secondly, we're going to talk about which ones you should track, and then how you're going to analyse what's important. And then lastly, remarketing 2.0, so how you actually put all of that in practice. So first of all, what actually is a microconversion? Well, it's a tiny conversion, it's a small conversion. It can be anything from it's basically anything that happens before the big thing that you really care about. Let's face it, you probably care about a sale, you probably care about a qualified lead, you probably care about that big thing at the end that you're all working towards, but there are loads of little things that happen before that thing that you really care about, and understanding that is really important, and that's what microconversions can do for you. So they are things like, maybe it's somebody downloading that white paper that someone's just been talking about. It could be that, it could be somebody signing up for a newsletter, it could even be somebody scrolling a page, or maybe interacting with a page for a certain period of time, so it doesn't have to be, it can be something super tiny, like a page scroll, or it can be something a bit bigger, like a newsletter sign up. Pretty much anything. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm going with this. And why are they important? Well, they're important because this is how you can start to piece things together. The main thing is, and I'm sure you will probably know this, but customer journeys are pretty complicated. They're really, really difficult to understand. And if I use an example to illustrate this, you don't just buy a car. I mean, maybe if you have too much money, maybe you do just buy a car, I don't know. But most people, there's loads of stuff that you do before that. So I'm sure you've all seen, sorry, it's really big, isn't it? I'm sure you've all seen Google's messy middle. You've probably seen this graphic millions of times, but you get the idea. It's a bit messy. Somebody starts looking at, maybe they want to buy a car, there's loads of squiggly bits in the middle, and then they buy at the end. And that journey's only getting more and more complicated. But if you look at this here, there's loads of things that people do. So, for example, you might read some blogs. You might start to read some content about the kind of cars that you want to buy. Then maybe you're going to start reading reviews, you're going to start looking at influencer content, I don't know, talk to your friends. And then you might decide all that research goes completely out the window and you're going to start again. And maybe you read some more content, I don't know. Then think about, maybe you go on a manufacturer's website and you configure a car that you can't actually afford and you're never going to buy. And then you maybe start again. And then you've got the fun of how are you actually going to buy the car. So you've got things like, you could buy it second-hand, you could buy it brand new, you could buy it on a marketplace, you could lease it. It's all so complicated. And then lastly, maybe you might test drive. I don't know if people do test driving anymore, who knows, but let's be honest, you could do that. And there's probably loads of other steps that I haven't detailed, but hopefully you kind of get the idea that these happen, and probably not necessarily in that order either. So the main thing I'm trying to tell you, if you haven't got this message quite so far, is that customer journeys are really, really complex, and they're not linear, they're pretty messy as well. They're confusing, and, drumroll please, luckily there is hope. So there is a solution to this, and I'm afraid, I'm sure you're probably all sick of talking about it, but it's GA4. And GA4 is because it's event-based, so think about this. GA4 can help us to measure those smaller interactions, and it helps you to start to build that picture. So what I'm going to do now is actually talk you through, rather than waffle on for a bit longer, I'm going to actually talk you through how to do this and how to actually make this a reality. So the first step would be actually measuring microconversions. Shocking, I know, but kind of helps, doesn't it? And we've provided some recommended lists. So what? I. Now, this is a horrible table. Although I say that, I'm talking to a bunch of PPCers. We do love an Excel spreadsheet, and we do love a table. I'm sorry, I kind of blanked out some of it, mainly to make it less horrible and scary, but there are basically event types and other fun bits of information on there. But basically, if, just say for example, your goal is lead generation, these are a list of things you might care about. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. There might be other things that you care about, and depending on the size of your business and, I don't know, the size of your client, how much traffic, all of those fun factors, but they are things like, for example, someone playing a video. It might be somebody registering for an account. It might be somebody interacting with live chat. Someone viewing a certain number of pages, someone viewing 5 or 10. But you get the idea. There are loads and loads of different things that you might care about. If we use the same example for e-commerce, you probably care about all of those things, but there are some other extra things you probably also care about too, and that's things like stages of the checkout process. I know that's fairly obvious, I don't need to point that out to you, but things like, for example, people viewing a particular category page, people viewing product pages, proper basic stuff. I know I'm telling you things you already know, but if you don't measure it, you don't know, and you don't know it's going to happen. So all of these things. But before I go on any further, there is some extra fun to consider, and that is not all events are the same, and they're not all created equally. So you do need to be aware of this, and I'm sure you've probably already come across it, but you do need to understand this. So hopefully I'll explain it, but if not, you can come and talk to me later. But there are different event types, and you've also got the fun of event parameters to think about as well. So there's a few considerations, and what I've done is I've broken them down into the top 4, listed by the best ones down to the ones which are slightly less useful, hopefully. And hopefully I'll break this down a bit better for you. So, starting with automatically collected events. You probably know about these because, as the name suggests, they're automatically collected. So they're already there. Now, these measure your basic interactions on site. These are things like, as we've got examples there, add clicks, add impressions, clicks, that kind of thing. It's fairly sort of basic stuff. You don't need to add any additional code. Obviously, if you're using GTag, Firebase, if it's an app, they're already there, and that's great. And default event parameters are there. Now, when I get to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about what event parameters actually are, and kind of give you an example, because I realise it's kind of difficult if you don't know. So the second one, so top 2 here, is recommended events. Now, these are super important. And the reason they're important is because these are the ones that actually populate your predefined dimensions and metrics. If you don't use your recommended events, your reporting won't be as rich and it won't be as useful. So it helps populate, because we all know with GA4, I don't know if you've noticed, every week there's a new exciting report that pops up. Had a fun one. I think I was telling someone earlier, someone was racking their brains trying to work out how to report on audience performance. How can I see what's going on by audience? I set up all these great things, and then I can't see how they're performing. Well, lo and behold, 1 week later, an audience report appears. Ta-da! So that is basically, as we know, GA4 is an evolving platform. So there you go. It might exist next week, who knows? But just so you're aware, this is it has mandatory and optional parameters. So there's things you have to tell it, and then there's things that are optional. Now, if you think of event parameters, kind of like extra layers of information, that's kind of the best way to think about it, extra layers of detail. So Google does have a list. I have helpfully put a link. I realise I can't click on this link, but just imagine that there is a link. And there's a list on Google somewhere that tells you all of these recommended events, so you can easily find it. It's not too hard to find. If I use adding payment information as an example, so basically the recommended event is adding payment information during the checkout process. The parameters are things like currency, value, type of payment, the category, the brand. So you might be able to then drill in and understand, for example, if there's trends where, I don't know, there's more drop off in a checkout with a certain brand, or there's more checkout, or there's more drop off with certain categories of product, or all this kind of stuff. And this kind of information, hopefully you get the idea, but it basically helps enrich all of that data and just gives you a bit more. In third spot is enhanced event measurement. Now, this is a funny one because it actually just measures interactions with your content. So it's just fairly basic stuff, and all you need to do is toggle a switch, and then it's there, like magic. But you do actually need to understand what it's actually measuring, because there are some weird and wonderful things that it does. So, examples are things like someone scrolling a page, someone viewing a page, someone starting a video, someone watching, 50% of a video, that kind of stuff. But think about the scroll event as a particular example. One of my colleagues spotted that it doesn't actually take into account the size of the screen that you're scrolling. So if, for example, you have a page that fits on a mobile device, it'll tell you you've scrolled the entire page. That's helpful, isn't it? You haven't done anything, you've just looked at a page. So it's really important to understand what these things measure and what they're actually telling you, because they might give you a false view of an engaged user when they've done nothing, they've just gone to your homepage and gone away again. Brilliant. So, and last but not least, there's custom events. And as the name suggests, they're basically everything else that you want to measure that you can't with the previous three things. So that's where you'd go as custom. You can choose the event parameters that you use, so you can decide what extra layers of information you want. And this is where, I appreciate this is fairly basic, but this is where you can measure someone's viewed 5 pages, someone's viewed 10 pages. They've been on your site for X amount of seconds or minutes or whatever you're interested in. So there's loads of different things there that you can do. So then, obviously, again, blindingly obvious step is just choose what you actually want to measure. So look at the menu, think about your site, think about all of those factors that we've just talked about, and then actually list and decide what's important. What do you actually want to measure? The second part is analysing this stuff. And then how on earth do you do that? Well, there's 3 ways that you can do it, and generally they all live in explorations. I don't know if you've had a little explore of this bit, but I had quite a lot of fun doing it, and I've ranked them in my top 3. So, number 1, segment overlap, my favourite. Number 2 is path exploration, which kind of looks more, if you cast your mind back really far in the past, and you think about universal analytics, and think about user behaviour flow, I don't know if you remember, all of a month ago when you were using that. You might find path exploration pretty familiar, because it looks the same. But it is different, obviously, but it looks very similar. And lastly is funnel exploration. This one has limited uses, but it can kind of be helpful. So I'm going to dig into all of these 3 in a bit more detail, because I realise I've just given you a very unhelpful overview of these 3 things. So first of all, where do you find them? Well, as I said, you find them in explorations, and then you go to segment overlap. Then what you need to do is basically you need to segment the data either by something, so by channel, so you could look at all paid channels, or you could look at organic traffic or anything like that, or any particular segment, and then you just break it down by event. And then you get this, which I appreciate is a really bad screenshot, but we're just going to go with it, but it's slightly blurred. I also realise I haven't really given you the world's best example of a segment overlap, but I'm going to go with it anyway. So I apologise, because I realise it's not that helpful, but as you can see, somebody visits a site for the first time, they start a session, and they view a page. Then, shockingly, they spend some time on that page, and then they scroll the page, and then they engage with the page. I know this is all really, really, really basic, but if you actually add more events, and you've actually got more to track, and you've actually going to get extra layers of information, and you're going to be able to start to piece together how people are using the site and what is actually triggering, more events, and you're going to start to get a picture of what people are doing before the kind of end result. So this is a way of analysing. It's probably my favourite because I think it's got the most potential for information, but this is personal preference. So the second one is path exploration. Now, this doesn't suit my mind because you can infinitely open all of these things, so you'll be there for the rest of time while you look at every single possible angle and segment of traffic and event. The events are nicely sequenced, but you can literally open any of these and then you can look at where they go and what event they trigger, and it gets very messy very quickly. And you could probably sink a lot of time in here, but it's quite visual, and I understand for some people's minds this is a very good way of visualising the customer journey. It does depend on what suits you. Like I said, my preference is the first, but this kind of works too. I think it's quite good, but I've wasted a lot of time doing this, to be honest. And lastly is funnel exploration. Now the reason that you need to be a bit careful with funnel exploration is because you determine what steps happen in that funnel. So if you, just for example, say your goal is generating leads or qualified leads, you then decide what order somebody does things in order to get to become a qualified lead. If somebody doesn't complete those steps in that exact order that you think they will, then that data won't appear in funnel exploration. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It tells you what you think you want to know, which if you have a very small website with not many pages, that might be super helpful. You might not have loads of stuff that can happen outside of this, but actually if you have a bigger website, you're kind of looking at something you're telling yourself is important, and that just seems a bit bonkers to me. But like I said, it has its uses, just maybe not like it's not the most useful, but it's a way, it's a possibility. So there are 3 ways. Now, once you've done all this stuff, then, yes, there's more. Step 3 is actually create audiences. So this is where the fun starts, or at least in my opinion anyway. And this is where, so mainly, this is probably going to be a great strategy for Google Ads. I appreciate I'm talking to a bunch of PPCers, so hopefully that's not shocking information. But in other exciting news, now that Meta have lifted the limit of 8 events that you can, or 8 kind of things that you can track, actually you could potentially replicate this on Meta as well, which is quite exciting. Well, exciting to me, but maybe not to everyone else. Obviously you can create audiences from it. You can then do things like use these in campaigns that are structured by objective. So if your objective is not strictly lead gen at this stage, or not strictly sales at this stage, you could use it in there. The other exciting thing you can do is you can use these events to sequence and then create an audience out of a sequence of events, or you can do it with somebody who does all the things that you care about, but not necessarily in the right order. And I'll show you some visuals and examples of that in a second. Hopefully we'll make that make a bit more sense. And lastly, what's really cool, well, again, I think it's cool, is that you can create a goal from that sequence as well. So like I said, I'm going to talk to you about it now, because hopefully this will make it seem a little bit more real. So if your objective at this stage is consideration, you might care about somebody who's watched 50% of the video, somebody who's read 2 articles on your site and maybe spent a couple of minutes on the page. So you might care about somebody who's done all of those things. You might care about them if they've done them in the order I've just told you, or you might care about them if they do them in a different order, because it doesn't really matter. But it kind of suggests it's somebody you might want to, maybe you might want to market to. So you can create an audience off of those people. Second example, an e-commerce purchase. Your goal is basically to get someone to buy something. Pretty much the main goal of most things we do, I know, but think about somebody who's viewed 5+ product pages, someone who's signed up for the newsletter, and maybe someone who's watched 3/4 of an unboxing video. That might be somebody you'd think is pretty ready to buy, someone who's pretty ready to go. And you can then create an audience off of the back of that, and potentially you could make that into a goal and optimise towards it as well. So you can actually make sure that you're getting more of those people as well. And lastly, lead gen, very similar vein, I'm sure you're getting the idea by now. Somebody who scrolled 75% on an article, they've maybe gone to a page which hosts a form submit but haven't actually submitted it yet, and then they've signed up for a newsletter. Maybe they've done that. Now, just to be clear, I like Venn diagrams. You don't have to have 3 events. You can have 2 or 4 or 5 or 6. It depends on the level of traffic that you've got to your site. I just used, maybe it was a mistake, but I used 3 Venn diagrams because they're fairly easy to kind of go through. But hopefully you get the idea. You can make this as simple or as complicated as you want to. It is going to depend on the level of traffic you have to site, and it's also going to depend on what your goal is and what you're trying to actually achieve. But the whole point of all of this is a new era of remarketing, turbocharged remarketing. We all know that well, we've been still using cookie-based remarketing for Christ knows how long, and let's be honest, it's probably been excluding all Safari traffic for what, 3 or 4 years, I don't know. We just kind of pretend that isn't happening, like it's okay. But it's all right, we don't need 50% of the population, it's fine, don't worry about it. But we do, and this is a way that you can hopefully start to build that picture back up. And the other cool thing is that you might not be the only person that cares about this stuff. Shock horror, maybe your SEO team care about these things too. Maybe your conversion rate team. Pretty much everyone who does digital marketing in your business or your agency will get some value from this. And it means you can collaborate and you can actually talk to them. And then you can find out how valuable the organic traffic that you're sending to the site is. You can find out those GDPR links that we've always struggled to understand how valuable they are. You can start to measure them and it really, really makes a difference. So that's really cool too. So just to summarise, just going to go through 3 steps. Step 1, measure your micro-conversions. So first of all, choose what you're going to track, create your events, and obviously use recommended where you can, because that's really the best one. Analyse your data, so basically use your chosen expiration, or if you've got another way of doing it, but expirations is normally the most helpful. Look at the trends and the patterns and start to collate your audience strategy. So start to think about what's going to be useful for you. And then thirdly, build the audiences in GA4 and start to segment your campaigns by objective, apply your audiences, and then favourite advice of the day, it's a bit like it depends, but test and learn. You just have to keep testing it. I'm kind of starting to get a sense, because one of the big things is going to be audience size. There is no point creating loads of audiences that have about 2 people in it, because you can't run a campaign. So you're going to have to base the level of complexity on the level of traffic and the sizes of the audiences, but you can play around with that and get a feel for what works for you. So what's the point of all of this? Basically, the same point as with everything that we do: more qualified leads, more sales, more revenue, more profitability. And that's it. Thank you.